I did a fair bit of research on what happened around the country, because there are other consolidations that have happened. Typically, what you find is what's kept it from getting on the ballot, and one of the reasons we started with a citizen-driven effort was elected officials often would prevent it from happening. A Sun Valley citizen here, Jim Bronson, lived in a community called Santa Clarita. They had, I think, combined 3 cities and part of a county. And it had been talked about for close to 20 years. And there was a lot of resistance to getting on the ballot. Finally got on the ballot, passed with 80%. There's a even more recent one in Minnesota. Similar deal. City council people resisted that. Eventually it was kind of forced by citizen petition to vote on it and it passed. So I think that's an important thing, and we're trying to put that aside. We recognize you're going to go from 10 elected officials to 5 elected officials, and there can be people impacted. But we think that the savings, it would be irresponsible for us to not look at this given the magnitude of the savings, particularly in these financial times. Go ahead and advance. An important theme here is if there's a consolidation, it should be highest common denominator. Both cities have areas that they're particularly good at, and conversely maybe not as good at. And so as we've looked at this, we don't believe there's any reason why any services should go down, particularly with the level of redundancy and savings we have. And it's across the areas that matter a lot to people. You know, of course, health and safety, the roads, and whatnot. Go ahead and advance. Another important item is design review. And the cities have a fairly similar process. And one of the things that we believe is very important is there's some dynamics that are unique to each city. For example, Sun Valley in the resort area has its own kind of unique zoning requirements. Those can and should be grandfathered in a combined scenario, and that's possible. For most people, particularly that I've talked to in Sun Valley, this is probably the single biggest issue. I know it is. It goes back. I remember having discussions with my wife, a few years back, very frustrated when there was some things going on in Ketchum that, frankly, we didn't have a voice in. And the reality is, for most people in Sun Valley, on a day-to-day basis, unless they're doing development, they're far more affected by what's going on in Ketchum than they are in Sun Valley. That's where we shop, we recreate, and get entertainment, and we'd like to have a voice. And conversely, I'm sure there's areas that Ketchum voters would like to have a voice in what happens in Sun Valley. I think this is, again, probably the single most important aspect. And I think some of the people who've expressed skepticism or vocal opposition, in my mind, made the most persuasive argument why we should look at this, because they want to have a voice. They're frustrated in some cases what's been going on. With respect to cultures, now we're going to get into the frequently asked questions and then segue into open mic, if you will. But one thing, I'll address the culture aspect. As I thought about it, there's really twin neighborhoods in both communities. Take West Ketchum, I think, has its twin in Twin Creeks. You've got Warm Springs and Elkhorn Village. And you can kind of go through, and I think just about every neighborhood you can imagine, we've got a similar profile of people. And all across the continuum, colorful characters, conservatives, progressive, liberals, whatever. And so I think in many respects we share a lot more than we